Hello and welcome to the final revision video relating to USA, A Nation of Contrast, 1910 to 1929. Today we are going to be looking at our final key question 7, the role of women. As always, I'm going to ask you to pause at this point to make sure that you get the headings down. Today we're going to be looking at women in pre-war years, the impact of World War I, change in political attitudes, the influence of jazz culture, flapper lifestyle and feminism, new fashions, and opposition to the flapper lifestyle. So they're the headings that we're going to be covering today. So, women in the pre-war years. Politically, they're not allowed to play a part in politics at all. They're not allowed to have anything to do with politics, and they don't have the vote either. Employment-wise, there's very limited opportunities for women. Most middle-class and upper-class women don't go out to work, as this interfered with their domestic role as the housewife. Most working class women were in really low paid jobs such as cleaning, dressmaking or secretarial work. So still quite domesticated work, even though they were working. Socially, it was thought to be really unladylike for a lady to smoke and drink. Women had to be accompanied by a chaperone. Divorce and sex before marriage were frowned upon and were very rare. Women were expected to wear tight-waisted ankle-length dresses, have long hair tied back, and not wear any makeup either. The First World War, however, changed all this. 2.8 million men are drafted into the armed forces, and more than 1 million women are then drafted in to help out with the war effort. About 90,000 women served in the US armed forces in Europe. There was Navy and Marine Corps enlisting women as clerks, radio electricians, chemists, accountants and nurses. Heavy industry jobs that were traditionally done by men start employing women. And it basically proved that women could do jobs just as well as men, and it encouraged women to have a greater freedom. They started smoking, going out on chaperone, they started drinking, and they started forming this argument that women should have the vote. They've worked, they've contributed to the war effort, so why should they not have the vote? And this then leads to change in political attitudes. So the North American Women's Suffrage Association and the Congressional Union for Women's Suffrage had been campaigning for many, many years, but very, very unsuccessfully. They'd been very unsuccessful in persuading any politicians really to back them. But World War I was a huge turning point. The 19th Amendment becomes law then in 1920 because basically women had contributed so much during World War I. It basically there was no argument for them to not have the vote anymore because they'd shown that they could do things just as well as men. They got the right to vote and they also got greater political power. And this leads to advances in politics. So in 1924, Nellie Taylor Ross of Wyoming is the first woman to be elected as a governor of a state. 2 years later, Bertha Knight Landez, first female mayor of Seattle. However, these are few and far in between. These are very special cases, and mostly women made little progress. There was only a handful of female politicians who were not treated very well either when they got there. And the women's movement actually failed in its attempt to get the Equal Rights Amendment Act. That actually was an act that supposedly was supposed to make men and women equal by law. So you couldn't discriminate, very similar to what we had in this country, which was the Sex Discrimination Act. But you couldn't treat men and women differently. This law actually didn't get through Congress until 1972. So it was many, many years after this that it even got through anyway. So you can see that America was just not ready as a country to accept changing the change in political change in women at this time anyway. Jazz has a massive influence on women. They allow the flappers to express themselves. They can smoke, they can dance, they can drink alcohol in speakeasies. And the 1920s is then styled as the age of the flapper. Many new liberalised women went to the jazz clubs, dance halls and speakeasies. They allow women to escape from their traditional roles as daughters and mothers, and they also have greater freedom to express themselves in their language, their clothing, their behaviour. It also provides new jobs for women, as jazz venues are encouraged actually to employ flappers to appeal to the new youth culture of the 1920s. Women performers also start leading the way, and they also find employment in advertising, cosmetics and clothing. All of this is related to the jazz age of the time, really. Dancing, garments, radios, cosmetics revolved around jazz culture. Advertising for these products targeted these kinds of women. Now, again, a number of flappers terms actually as well. They even developed this sort of own sayings, really, their own slang. They have to say saying things like going to see a man about a dog was going to buy a whiskey, and a handcuff and a manacle was an engagement or a wedding ring. Petting parties become popular where the flappers would kiss men in public. Dances become more popular, as we looked at in the last key question. Number of the flappers terms are actually still used today, like big cheese, very important person, bump off for killing someone, and hooch for alcohol. But not every girl enjoyed the flappers' way of life. Poor women couldn't really afford the new fashions. They didn't have time to go out and enjoy social events. Black women could not really benefit from the change in lifestyle either. And women in the Bible Belt certainly did not adopt this new way of life. And many older women were outraged and actually formed the anti-flirt club. However, that doesn't take away from the fact that flapper lifestyle and feminism became increasingly popular during the 1920s. Women start to smoke in public. It becomes acceptable for them to drive cars, take part in energetic sports. The young women of the 20s were referred to as flappers. Hollywood referred to as flappers, and Hollywood films would characterize them. And as a result, their behaviour and dress sense is imitated around the world. The flapper style becomes popular all around the world. In 1919, women's skirts were about 6 inches above ground level, but by 1927, it was knee level. Young women in particular rebelled against the old-fashioned clothes of their mother's area. The corset goes out of fashion, and it becomes all the rage for women to cut their hair in a short bob, wears lots of makeup, and wear lots of nice jewellery. Lots of women become icons then. One of the most famous flapper icons is Joan Crawford. Here she is here wearing some very outrageous headwear. She starts her career as a dancer on Broadway before moving to Hollywood to make a name for herself. She's in films like Paris and The Unknown, and she becomes famous for her flapper style. She drank, she smoked, she danced to Charleston, she even kissed on screen. Many young girls idolised her and sort of tried to copy her as well. Other flappers like Colleen Moore and Clara Bow, the so-called It Girl, they became icons as well, and young women tried to sort of copy their style and their fashions. So what were these new fashions? Well, they would cut their hair short and they wear makeup, wore short skirts, past just up to the knee, and very bright clothes. They smoke and drink in public. They go out to speakeasies and to the cinemas without any chaperones. They openly dance with men in public, especially the Charleston. They listened to jazz music. They drove cars and even motorbikes, and they wore revealing swimming costumes in public, even though this was actually banned in a lot of states. Not everybody was very happy about the flapper lifestyle, though. In some respects, the flapper lifestyle did very little to further the cause of women's rights, because it made women seem irresponsible and immoral, and this didn't appeal to the wider sort of traditional sense of America. Flappers were seen as too extreme by these people, especially the people in the Bible Belt. Religious societies really didn't approve of them at all. And as we've discussed earlier, there was anti-flirt leagues formed, which are basically anti-flapper leagues. Some flappers deliberately flouted the law because they were deliberately trying to wind up these people, and they were arrested for doing things such as wearing swimsuits that were banned. Others saw flappers as not really doing anything for women, but just as pleasure seeking. They didn't want to contribute anything to society. They just wanted to have fun. And lots of women were often sympathetic, but they didn't have the money to adopt the new fashions or attend events, and so they couldn't actually. So a good question that could come up for this would be an essay question. It would be something along the lines of, did women's lives change completely during this time? And from what we've discussed today, you'd have to pick out things like, yes, they did, because of the flapper lifestyle, because of the new fashions, because of the vote, because of jazz culture. But on the flip side, no, they didn't, because of the political stance not being that much improved. Lots of opposition, lots of women unable to take on these new changes. And that brings me to an end of the video. Thank you very much for listening. Hopefully these videos have been helpful. Thank you very much.